Is just kind of introduce yourself so you know who each person is. So you tell us your name and where you're student teaching, what grade level, that kind of thing. So.
Okay, I'm Chelsea Evans, and I'm student teaching in Lind with kindergarten, and there's 14 kids.
Okay.
What TPA they're going to do?
Yeah, I'm doing literacy.
Okay. Stephanie?
I'm Steph Hebig, and I am student teaching in Marshall, and I'm doing this world languages Spanish TPA.
I'm Erin Hoppy, and I'm student teaching in Lester Prairie, Minnesota, and I am in a first grade, actually 2 first grade classrooms, so that's been interesting. And I'm doing elementary math for my TPA.
Okay.
I'm Stacy Brizendine. I'm student teaching in LaCrae, and I'm doing math. I'm in a first grade classroom.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. So, we've got Chris Panic is coming in too, so she'll be here shortly. She's another elementary person. So, I don't know, maybe I'll just go through the beginning part of this because a lot of it is just kind of the, how did we get to here with the TPA stuff, and then we'll see what questions you have and get things rolling there. So, they're videotaping me so I can be broadcast to everybody. So, is it got on there okay? All right,
yep.
So, I'll go ahead and, okay, hopefully the board is, the board not?
Move your mouse.
Maybe.
Okay, now try.
Okay, well, we'll just do it this way then. Okay, so just some background on the whole TPA thing, if you haven't heard this part before. It was originally developed out in Stanford, in California, and back then it was called the PACT, the Performance Assessment for California Teachers. Hi, Brittany. Brittany, we had everybody introduce themselves, so if you want to tell them who you are and where you're student teaching and what grade level and what TPA are you doing?
I am Brittany Daniker. I'm student teaching in Staples, Motley, Minnesota, and I'm doing the math in kindergarten.
Okay. So we got a lot of kindergarten and first grade going on here. Okay, so we are just getting started. So I'm on the very first slide here really of the presentation. So it started out as PACT. They had it for several years. It's actually been going on for like 8 years out in California now. And they did quite a bit of research on this to see what they were looking for is there a way that when you went through student teaching that principals would know this person's going to be a good teacher in the classroom, other than MTLE tests, practice tests, things like that, that really aren't a good measure. And what they found out is when they used this PACT, it actually did have a really good predictor. If you did well on your PACT or your TPA, you were likely to be a very effective classroom teacher as well. So they did a lot of actual research on this, and there's a website if you want to go see more about that and what's been published on it, you can. A lady by the name of Linda Darling Hammond, who's very well known in ed research circles, is a person who's done a lot of the research. She actually works for the U.S. Department of Ed now, which is probably why this has become a big U.S. initiative. TPA is being spread out over the entire country. Minnesota chose to be one of 5 states that's an accelerated state in terms of we're moving ahead with this a lot faster than other states are. So we've had it in the works for a little while now. It started out with some pilot testing back in the fall of 11. Then it went into field testing in the spring of 12. It was supposed to go live full force this year, but they ran into a couple of glitches. So now it's still in field testing for this year as well. But the way it's looking, they should have all that resolved and it'll probably be full force in effect for next fall. So all schools in Minnesota, all colleges of teacher ed are required to have their candidates, all of them, complete the TPA, or the edTPA now. So it's not an option. The pilot was. This one's now everybody has to do it, and we're still collecting data. And so they've been revising and making changes. So the last change came out in January, for those of you who are student teaching now. And so that's what we're going to go through today, is just kind of show you a little bit of what those changes are. I think most of them are really good changes. I think, you know, if you've seen the TPA from before, the new edTPA it's much more concise, the language is better, just the way it's arranged is better. So they've done a lot to make it more student friendly. So there's Chris. Hi. We put you over here next to Chelsea. Perfect. And so what we asked everybody to do was to tell us your name and where you're student teaching, what grade level, and which TPA are you doing.
Oh, okay. Oh, Oh, sorry, do it now. I'm Chris. I'm in Esterville, Iowa, at the elementary, and I'm in first grade, and I'm doing the math.
Okay, so we've got a pretty even mix of
We have a graduate community in Esterville, Iowa.
we do. We could put you in the
Oh,
grad
really?
program.
Oh,
next
yeah,
year.
they're actually, the other one's first grade teachers.
She's in,
Lacey.
well, I'm not teaching it, but
Oh.
we have a graduate program
That we just started
in Iowa
there,
and
yeah.
Esterville.
Okay, yeah.
You're there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was just taking through kind of the beginnings of how this all came to be with the TPA and all that good stuff. And just talking about the latest revision came in January. And what they're telling us now is this is the last revision, theoretically at least. They're not expecting any more big changes. If we have more changes, they would be very minute. But this is the one they expect to stick with. There are several states who are already using the TPA for licensure. Minnesota is not there yet. Would not surprise me an ounce if they move that direction within the next year. So right now, for people going through, like you are, student teaching, it isn't required for licensure. But if you wanted to go to Ohio, New York, several other states, California has been there a long time, Washington State, they already do use it for licensure. So your scores would go with, and so that would help you for that.
Do you mean in addition to like the MTLE and everything, or in place of?
Good question. It depends on the state.
Okay.
MTLE is a Minnesota. It's Minnesota teacher licensure exam, so they're only a Minnesota product. Some of the states have people take whatever licensure exams they use, Praxis, or there's some others. Other states just use the TPA. And so really what the kind of best thinking out there is saying that really there should be multiple measures. We should use the TPA because it does give a performance sample of what you're doing in the classroom. We should probably make sure you have good content background and can pass your content tests. But especially the discussion here in Minnesota has been we probably also want to use your mentor teacher and university supervisor's scoring and recommendation, because it is possible that we could have somebody who did just an awesome job in their student teaching and didn't put much effort into their TPA, or you could have the reverse, somebody who just kicked butt for that week of their TPA and really just laid back and didn't do much for the rest. And if everything was built on that 1 week, why would you work really hard the whole rest of the semester? So our thought is really there should be multiple measures, and probably all of those are valid. That's why there is some talk of using the TPA, the edTPA, to replace the pedagogy test. Rather than doing a multiple choice test on how you teach, that this really does a better job of measuring that. So that's a possibility, and that's been mentioned in the discussion for Minnesota. So we'll see where all that goes as they're trying to make up some of these decisions. So, okay. Okay, so how is the TPA alike or different from what we used to do for student teaching? A lot of it is alike. You always had to write and teach a unit. You had to journal to your university supervisor. We've always had you videotape a lesson from way, way, way back. And you always did the reflection piece. So all of that is a part of what you do in your edTPA now. The things that are different is this is kind of packaged. It's all in this document where you type things up. It has the context for learning part, which is really nice for someone scoring it. They have a better sense of, well, who's in your classroom? What are the challenges you deal with versus, the next person? It has a more formal assessment task where you're looking at student work and determining what are they understanding, what are they not, where do I go from here. So that part is more formalized. And now it's submitted either to the state or national level for scoring, where before it was always, your student teaching was determined by your school, your mentor teacher, your university supervisor. So now we can actually compare, and see, if somebody from SMSU, how do they rate against somebody from South Dakota or somebody from Washington State or wherever. So we have a more valid measure of being able to say how people from different schools do. So that's kind of where a lot of this came from too, in this whole era of accountability. They wanted a way to be able to say which schools are doing things right. So, things that are important for you to know. The access to the edTPA materials is highly restricted. They guard these things like they're state secrets. So, your university supervisor does not have access to the handbooks even. We can only give them out to faculty and to students. So, you need to let your university supervisor see the handbook. It has to come from you. And partly all of you, except for Stephanie, are elementary. You have choices too, so they need to know which one you're planning on doing. So if you would please, when you download your TPA from LiveText, that handbook document, the PDF, you can go ahead and share that with your university supervisor. You can just download it and send it to them in an email, and that's fine. I believe, because I asked all of you ahead of time, I think I have shared your TPA now with your university supervisor, but if that would check on that, make sure your university supervisor has the TPA that you're planning on doing. And if they don't, you can share it with them, okay? It's just the way they've got this thing set up, you have to be a trained scorer and all this sort of stuff to have access to it. And so not all the university supervisors do. The piece this time about we had to figure out who was scoring everybody way up front. And so some of you, I don't know if anybody, did any of you get an email that yours is being sent to Pearson? Yeah, we kind of just randomly picked, you know, some elementary lit, some elementary comm arts, and I think one secondary. So you know if you were one of those people. And the rest are being scored on campus. So about a third of them are going to national scoring. The rest will score here. But because I had to find that out from you ahead of time, I was able to send handbooks to university supervisors. But that's trusting email, so please check with your supervisor and make sure they got it. Okay, if you would do that part. Let's see, you have access through your live text account. We'll take a look quick about how do you get there, how do you get to it, and then we've asked you to make sure you share it with your university supervisor. You can also make a visitor's pass if you want your university supervisor to see your whole TPA once you've uploaded it to live text. And that was part of those documents, the whole big stack that went out with the email. So if you have any questions on how to make that visitor's pass, you can give that to principals, you can give that code that you get to anybody, and then they can see your TPA. So that's your choice to do that. So, things that we've seen so far now that we're into this about a year and a half, we encourage you really to get your TPA done either before you take on the full student teaching responsibilities for all day or on the way back down again. So when you're getting to the point, Debbie, can you grab the door for her? When you're getting to the point that you're not teaching full time and you're backing off of the classes and turning it back over to your classroom teacher, that's another good time to do it. Mostly because if you're writing lessons for everything all day, Stephanie knows this, you're in there and you're intense. So it's easier to do this part when you can spend part of your time focusing on this. So, you know, doing it on the way up to full-time or on the way back down again. Once in a while, we've had students who struggle in getting their permission forms back from the parents on the videotaping, or they only get a certain number of students. You can only use the students you have permission from in your videotape. So, if that becomes an issue, some things that you can do is you could work with just a smaller group of students. You know, say you get 8 of them. You can put them at a table and videotape you working with that group if you can't get the permission slips from your whole class. So that is possible.
It might be smart too to, if you haven't done this, to ask the office, like our district, we, as part of like the packet when you sign up for school, you allow your photo and video to be taken.
Yep.
So you can omit.
So the district might have already had everybody sign off on that, and if they do, amen. That makes your life a lot easier. But yeah, every school district's different on that. So you might need to pass them out to everybody in your class. Your district might have that covered. You need to check with your mentor teacher and find out for sure. So.
See, I was under the understanding you had to do it on their own, but...
No, it really depends, because like no, Marshall has said, no, we already have everybody sign off, so they're fine. But it is, I think Lakeview does that too. You know, it's by individual districts. They all have their own piece of it. Some of them actually, if they're around here, have done it simply because we have students in there videotaping all the time, and they do it too for their PLCs. So they just, you know, sign off at the beginning of the year so they don't have to keep messing with it. So, but other things we've had issues with, we have video cameras available from the Ed department. If you want to check one out from Carol, we've got a little flip camera that we're using today. If you need one, you can check one out with her. She needs to know when you're going to pick it up, when you're going to bring it back. You can't mail them because they don't bounce well. But they are available. The biggest thing is if you're using your own camera, you need to know how do you get the video off the camera. That's been our biggest. I've had people that want to send me their camera because it's on there, but they don't know how to get it off. And if that's the only video you have, now this is a problem. So you need to know what do you have to do to get it off. And I encourage people, and it's later on here too, practice ahead of time. Videotape something that absolutely does not matter, even if it's 10 minutes of it, just so you know, can I get it downloaded, you know, can I get it where I need it to go? Can I edit it? Any of that sort of stuff. You can't do any major editing. What you can do is you have to take a chunk. So each TPA has slightly different requirements for what they need. And I think for the group I have here, yours are fairly consistent. You can do, I would say it's up to 15 minutes, and it can be in 2 chunks. But like I know science is 20 minutes, and you have to do 2 chunks. They need one in a lab and one not. So each one, look in your task 2 requirements and see what it says for your TPA. It can be 1 video, or it can be 2. And it doesn't have to be from the same lesson. Sometimes people will have one part from where they're more teaching the lesson and another part where they're more working with students. That can be from 2 different days. It's just when you're writing up your task 2, you have to be very clear which lesson this is coming from. You know, this was day 2, this was day 4. As long as your person viewing it knows, because they're going to go back to your lesson plans for that day and say, you know, where is this piece? So the communication piece is really important. The other issue we had, we didn't find out about until we had to upload things to Pearson last spring, is Pearson has a file size limit. LiveText didn't, but Pearson does. And so we didn't find this out until we were actually submitting. So because of that, there's a piece of software I sent you directions on called Handbrake, and it actually makes your life much simpler too. What Handbrake does, it's a free online software. It compresses your video. It will upload then to LiveText really much faster. It'll take it down to like half the size. So instead of it taking half an hour to upload, it'll take like 10 minutes. So it's going to be much easier for you to do. The other piece that's really nice about using the Handbrake is it automatically saves it in the file format that it needs to be in for viewing, either for us or for Pearson. There's certain file formats you have to use, and they give you all that in the detail-y pieces of your TPA. That you can't go wrong with this. It will automatically save it in the right format for you. So then you'll know that everything works. So I encourage you to use that. One of the documents I sent to you was a Handbrake, and if you need something and you don't have it again, just shoot me an email and I can send it out to you. I have all that stuff available. So make sure you use that so that you've got it small and you won't have any issues getting it uploaded. Some changes that have happened then with the new edTPA. They have to be used starting the spring semester. They added special education. If any of you are interested, we just got our special education approved. Yesterday we found out about this. Yay! So our new undergrad program for the new special ed licensure will be on the books for fall. There was a question about the scoring, and so now Pearson has told us that they're going to take care of, there's a grant paying for 1/3 of the people to be scored, and we know who they're going to be. We didn't know that until just a little bit ago. The rest will be done by university supervisors, or faculty, I should say, on campus, and all of us have been trained scorers. So ideally, we'll have very consistent results that way. Like I mentioned, your edTPA scores may eventually be used for licensure, but they haven't decided on a cut score. You have to have a 2 in each area or any of that yet. So for you, none of that really matters. Would you pull that in? But that's where it may go in the future. And starting probably next fall, there will actually be a cost to students for doing your TPA. They're talking about $300, so be really glad you're student teaching now. Oh, yes. And so it'll probably have to be a course fee added on to student teaching that will cover the cost of this thing, which is another reason we're hoping that it then replaces the MTLE pedagogy test, because at least you pay a little less for something. So, but all of that is kind of still what's being determined yet this spring. So, now I get into the meat and potatoes. There are 3 components now. There used to be 4 tasks, now there are 3. And the 3 tasks are your planning, your instructing, and your assessing. So it's down to these 3 tasks. The academic language that used to be a piece all by itself at the end is now built into all 3 of these. So there are rubrics related to academic language in the planning part, in the the instruction part, and part of the assessment and the reflection at the end. And then the reflection piece is actually built into all 3 of these as well. So there used to be separate rubrics and separate tasks for those. Now it's just the 3 main tasks. There's 5 rubrics in each. So it's 15 total rubrics, but they kind of cleaned it up so it fits together more nicely. And when you go into your TPA, the rubrics are right in each task. So before you had to scroll all the way to the bottom to find, how am I going to be scored on these things? Now it's right with your directions for each of these. So I really encourage you, once you're filling things out, go look at the rubrics. See what it says you need to do. Our goal is a 3. That's where the average student teacher should be, is at a 3. So be kind of looking, make sure you've got everything in there. I encourage people to use their language. You know, use the phrases that they say in your typing. It makes it very easy for scorers to find what they're looking for then. So just start your sentence with their phrase, you know, here is where I, X, Y, Z. Use their language, it makes it very clear for them to find it. Let's see. The academic language part is probably the place we've had the most questions on, and for us too. It was the newest piece for us. And the academic language is really your content language. So when you're in math or when you're in reading, or certainly in Spanish, what's your vocabulary that you're using? But also the language in the instructions. What might be there that students might not understand? So, you know, if you're in math, what does graph mean? And if a student doesn't know that term, how are you teaching it? So it needs to be identified in your planning. The other piece you have to have is how are you teaching this? And then they need to see it in your instructional sequence. So even though you have it at the top of the lesson plan that you know what the vocabulary is, they need to see where are you teaching this as part of your lesson plan. Where have you got that built in that, oh, here's where we're going to do a word wall, or here's where we're doing this graphic organizer, or whatever it is you're doing. Make sure it's in your instructional sequence of what you're doing so that they can pull that out. Okay. So, task 1 planning, you need to use the SMSU lesson plan template. That is in live text. I mentioned here to get your TPA or to get this, you log in, go under documents, and then click on the green plus that says new. And that's where you get to your lesson plan template. That's also where you get to your TPA. So you have documents there for both. I encourage you, once you get the template, just save it on your desktop because then you can open it and use it as many times as you need to for your TPA. You need 3 to 5 days worth of lesson plans. If you were teaching on a block schedule, Stephanie, yours are like 60 or 70 minutes, aren't they?
On my street teaching?
Yeah.
60.
So then, you know, if you're a longer classes, 3 is enough.
Okay.
If you're talking like especially elementary where you might have shorter time periods, then you probably want 5. So it kind of depends on how much time you're putting in your lessons. But 3 to 5, it's what they call a teaching event or a unit. Chris?
About that, like, okay, I did mine and it ended up actually being 7 days because it didn't,
okay.
You know,
Yep.
Do you just focus on 5 of those?
Yeah.
Do you just pick
Yep.
out 5? Okay.
Yep. So, yeah, you only need the 5 days, but
Okay.
yeah. 'Cause, yeah, a lot of times teaching doesn't fit within those nice
Yeah, no,
boundaries.
exactly.
Snow days happen and all kinds of fun stuff. So. Let's see, check in your edTPA how many pages does it say you have for restriction. And they used to have it mean like you needed 9 pages single spaced in one section and whatever, and these things got huge. They've cut that back substantially. The other piece, though, don't feel like you have to use all of that. If you can say what you need to say in less pages, you don't need to use 7 pages. That's your limit. Don't go over that. Okay? I know at least at the national level, like for Brittany, if yours is going to Pearson, that's as far as they'll read. And then at the end of that page, they stop. So, and I can tell you from going to the scorer training, there's a reason for that. The very first ones we got, they didn't have limits on. I actually had one turned in that was 300 pages long.
Oh, wow.
And that person scored a 1 because they had 300 pages of nothing. I mean, more is not better. You need to get to the point, say what's important, and use the rubrics to help you determine that. Make sure you answer the questions and look at the rubrics. What are they actually asking for? As long as they can find what they're asking for, less is more. Right after we had the 300-page one, the next one wasn't even 60. And that was when we still had the long format. And I was thinking, oh, here comes another one that there won't be enough. That person had 4s and 5s on the way through because they'd gotten to the point and they really said what they needed to say in a short amount of space. So it doesn't need to be hugely lengthy. They will allow you to use a certain amount of your teacher edition or pages from your book. You can scan some extra support pages in. Or maybe you're using some supplemental materials that you want to include on here. You can add those too, and they'll tell you how many pages because it is different for each content area. So how many of those you can use. What they do not want to see, don't scan in the lesson plan from the teacher edition and think that's your lesson plan. You will get 0 credit for that. I've had people try this. No, that's not your lesson plan. Okay? You certainly can build off of that, but you need to put it into the SMSU template and fill out all the components. So you can build off what they have, but don't think that that's it. Let's see. Make sure that you put in what the Minnesota Academic Standard that you're meeting is, and please don't just put the number, like 3B6, write out what that benchmark is. So actually give the statement of the standard so that you're, again, try to make it, think of yourself on the other side scoring this thing. Make it as easy for that person as you can. They're going to be smiling at you. You know, don't make them go digging for things. So just, you know, copy paste what the standard is right into there so they know what your standard and benchmark is that you're addressing. After that, you're going to write your lesson objectives. So you've got this whole, you know, maybe 1 or 2 benchmarks you're meeting with the whole 3 to 5 days. Well, what is it you're trying to do with just this lesson? So build your objectives off of those academic standards. They should have some of that same language in there, but make sure you're, you know, here's, out of this whole benchmark, here's the specific little piece I'm focusing on today. Okay? So it's really clear in here, here's the part I'm working on. And you can have objectives that don't relate back to your standards, but at least some of them should. Some should tie. You also can go more, you know, and have extras, and that's fine. But you don't really need, you know, a whole lot of objectives. Really, sometimes less is more. You focus on just a couple key things, and that might be the best. Especially for a lot of you that have really little kids. You can only really, 1 or 2 things is probably plenty. Then you need to identify the academic language. And there again, I would go back to your standards. Look at those first. What is that key language in the standards that they're identifying? And that might be problematic for your students. Look in your textbook. A lot of times they will give you vocab words of what might be troublesome for your students there. But also look at the directions for any worksheets or any activities you're giving them. Are there any words in there that they might struggle with? So you want to include those. So identifying the academic languages first. And as we said, what are you going to do to support students learning these? So that needs to be in the planning portion, not just up in the academic language, but how are you actually teaching this then? Where are you doing that? Then, the other piece we see sometimes, make sure you think about assessment. And that's why they have this now, the planning actually is planning and assessing. How are you going to know if students have learned what you've targeted for those objectives for that day? So whether it's informal, whether it's something more formal, you've got a worksheet or you've got a project that they're going to work on, but have that built in, and again, it needs to tie back to those objectives and those standards. There should be something that, okay, on this worksheet I'm going to clearly identify, do they know the CH sound? You know, what is it specifically? So that the activity isn't maybe just a fun activity, it's a, here's what they're learning. And I can identify what have they learned from today's teaching. Okay? So it has to tie back. So informal or formal, it's up to you. You do need samples of student work. So for all of you, that's a little bit easier because you can do something in a written form. Think about it for the folks in PE and art and music. Sometimes that's a little tougher for them, and they sometimes have to go back to a second video to get that to work. But paper is certainly a lot easier. You can scan something in and you've got samples of your student work. So that's probably the easiest way to go.
Is that just for the target students, or is that for all the students in the class?
Good question, and that's coming up a little bit here, so I'm going to hold that off for just a minute.
And, the examples have to be from the lesson you videotape?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's, no. The first part is yes, the second part is no.
Okay.
The samples of student work need to be from your teaching event, from the 3 to 5 days. They do not have to be from the one that you videotaped.
Okay.
Okay? Good question, because that's a piece that people aren't always sure about. They just need to be from the 3 to 5 days. They don't have to be from your videotape lesson. Okay? Let's see. Then the last one I have on here is you want to add information about why did you choose the strategies you did for teaching. And hopefully they're based on some best practices and some research-based methods. And it doesn't have to be an APA citation that you use, but it shouldn't just be because this looked fun or the teacher edition said it either. There should be a reason why you chose to use the strategy you did. And stating what it is moves you up to a 4. Telling why, what you expect from this. So I use the cooperative grouping for this because here's the goal I was looking for. That's all it takes to move you a 5. Quite honestly, a lot of times one more sentence is all it takes to move you above a 3 up to a 4 or 5. You just say, here's why I chose this strategy, and here's what I hope to gain from it, or why I would use this, why I think this is a good way to teach this. So it doesn't take a lot in your lesson plan to get there. You know, it's just kind of think about doing that. And if you do it consistently in your plans, you're going to be rewarded. So, yeah.
Do you have to cite the actual researcher?
No, you don't. I mean, if you know, you might say something like, I'm using multiple intelligences in my centers for math because Gardner, you know, said, and so in Gardner's theory,
right?
Yeah, it certainly doesn't hurt, but they're not requiring a book and a page number. But if you can say, I'm using Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences to set up my math centers, I've got things in music and in art and in, you know, whatever, you've already hit, you know, and then here's why I did this. You know, I've got students who learn best in each area. You don't need a book citation and the page and the quotes and the whole thing like that. But if you know whose theory it is, that's always a bonus. So, or the name of the theory. So, questions on that part? We're okay there? All right. So, task 2 is the instruction. Like I said, this tends to be, it's not that the teaching is hard, it's the videotaping that gets to be the issues here sometimes. So make sure you look in your handbook for your content area. What are the limits? Your video needs to show a segment with you instructing and engaging students, kind of like we're doing here with the questions back and forth. It should also show you giving feedback to students. So that can be in 2 different pieces, or it might be all in one clip. Doesn't matter. The other piece I've had questions from people is like, okay, you can maybe do up to 20 minutes in your TPA. What if I only have 14 minutes? Okay. As long as you're showing what you need to show, you don't have to use the whole space, just like the page limits. You don't need to use the whole time, as long as you're showing what you need to show. The other piece I've seen is people who have 2 video clips, and one of them really didn't show me anything. I mean, it was the teacher walking around the classroom or, you know, watching. I had one. I watched the teacher watch the students, you know, do an activity or take a test. And I couldn't use a thing from that. She didn't interact with the students. She didn't give directions. There wasn't anything on there, but it filled up her 20 minutes. So, you know, that's why I say videotape more than you need. It's good to just videotape the whole lessons from every day. Just have them. Then you can go back and pick out what you think are the best slots. And they don't have to be equally spaced either, like 10 minutes here and 10 minutes there. You can have one that's 3 and one that's 16. That's fine. It's just the time limit total. But you can pick out then the pieces that best show you engaging students in instruction and providing feedback. Because sometimes that feedback piece is more you walking around and working with individual students. So just depends. Let's see. The focus of your video should be on you. It's not on the students, it's on you. We want to see you and your teaching and your interaction with the students. So if all we see are the back of students' heads, that's fine. We don't really need to see the students, we need to see you. If you have access to a microphone, that's great. If you have access to the classroom that has the speakers where you wear the headset, awesome, because it works kind of like surround sound and the cameras pick it up much better. So even if you can trade a classroom for the day that you're videotaping, that's helpful. Not required, but you know, do the best you can to get good audio. That's a lot of times the hardest part, is there'll be a lot of background noise with kids, and it's sometimes hard to hear you. So that piece is helpful. You can add supporting information. There's going to be things that you write that go along with your instruction part. Tell them what happened before, what happened after. You can add that supporting information and kind of explain what the viewer is seeing, because we're not going to get the whole lesson. We're only going to get this little snippet. So feel free to add in, you know, here's what I did before, here's what students asked me afterwards, this is what I did. You know, that's okay. You can do that. And then we mentioned about needing to compress your video. The other piece that we ran into several times for fall was people that had used the Windows Movie Maker and left it in the project format. They thought they were done and they weren't, and they can view it on their computer. But if it isn't finished, they call it, and you upload it, no one else is going to be able to open it and see it. So you have to make sure that you actually do finish the video, and in the movie viewer you have to go under save and save it to your computer in a certain format. But so make sure, if you're not sure, this is a great time to have it, you know, upload it and have somebody open it on a different computer. If they can see it, you're good. But don't use the same computer because it'll go back to the file you already have loaded on there. So use a different one and make sure you can still see the thing. So that'll let you know for sure that you're able to see it. So, other questions related to the video part? Okay. The other thing I recommend sometimes to people, if you need some movie editing stuff to splice it, is iMovie. Virtually every elementary school, probably most of the high schools, have a Mac lab. And iMovie is really simple. So one of the documents I sent out to you kind of had a real, here's how you do it in iMovie, because it's very short and easy to use. So, yeah.
Okay, so if we do have some kids that didn't turn in, or their parents said that they can't do video, and we remove them from like the lesson, do we still include them in the contents for learning?
Yes.
Okay,
They're
so
still part of your class.
Yep, but we just like maybe make like a bullet that says
Yeah,
children.
yeah. When you're writing on the commentary in this part, you can say, hey, I had 4 kids whose either parents said no or didn't return the slip,
Okay.
so they aren't included in. And then they can't be used in your student samples either
Yeah.
of their work. So, but then you can just say that, you know, maybe they were your one ESL student,
Yeah, okay.
and now I can't use them. So you just add that commentary.
Okay.
So, good question. Okay, so assessing is the last task. This is where you provide the samples of your student work. The one thing I was going to mention for you, Stephanie, and I know we've got a few PE people that will probably be watching the video too. You can use video or audio. So in your case with foreign language, you might want to just audio tape students. And I know you use the Google Voice and things like that. You can use that for your assessing. So I know a lot of people in music and in PE sometimes use a more verbal assessment, and you can do that. So for most of you, if you're doing literacy and math, you're going to be fine with the paper pencil type version or something concrete. But you can use the other forms as well. Their preference, and I state it this way because it isn't a requirement, it's just a preference. They will tell you that they want to see work samples from different groups, if you have them. Not every classroom does. So if you have students who are on an IEP, if you have students who are gifted and talented or English language learners, they would like at least one of your work samples to be from one of those groups. Not every classroom has all of those. If your classroom doesn't, then what they ask you to do is kind of divide up your students in terms of learning ability, those that are below, those that are about average, those that are above average, and compare them that way. So the learning of your students, they're basically asking you to say, how do you differentiate the learning of students at different levels? Okay, so that's the main idea here. You will need to develop some criteria for scoring your work, and you want to tie that criteria, this is a big one, back to those lesson objectives and back to the standards. So if you're specifically looking at, I'm going to go back to the CH sound was one of the things I need. Well, then that needs to be in part of your criteria. How many times did they correctly match the CH sound to the picture of the correct animal that, you know, or whatever it was you were doing? It should be tied back to what your lesson objectives were and to the standard. So your criteria should map clearly back, and then you're using that to differentiate between who are the kids who really got it, who are kind of average, and who struggled. The other piece they're going to ask you about then is what patterns did you notice? Which things are they having the most problem with? And in which group? And then maybe, you know, what do you think? The last part of that is what are your next steps? So now that you know, here's how they did, and here's where they had some problems, what are you going to do about it? What are your next steps? Whether it's the next day of teaching your lesson or next week when you're not doing your TPA but you're back student teaching, what are your plans? How are you going to help Brittany here who was having trouble with that CH sound? What are your next steps? They specifically, here again, if you want to bump it up to a 4 and a 5, target those specific groups. You can say generally, here's what I'm going to do with the class, and that's what the level 3 asks for. A 4 and a 5 asks you to target specific groups of students or specific individuals. And if you write a little bit more and say, here's what I'm going to do for Susie, here's what I think Bobby needs, maybe related to their IEP, that's what bumps it up to a 5. So sometimes it's a matter of an extra paragraph or so, you know, just kind of really targeting certain students and what they need. So
I've seen a lot of people just write, I'm going to reteach.
yeah.
If you're not going to get in.
Reteach doesn't score well.
So think of a
Yeah.
clever activity
Yeah.
to do to help that group of students learn. And I know you learned a lot of that in your math and in reading. Just what's something that you can do, an instructional strategy with them. I think that,
Yeah.
that would gain you.
Yeah,
a lot
and you
more
know, why are
points.
you choosing this strategy?
Right.
What specifically? I mean, reteach absolutely is probably what you're going to do, but what are you going to reteach? And doing it the same way twice is probably not helping those kids. So what different strategy are you using if the first time didn't work? That actually leads back into something else I have on here too, and maybe it's on the next one. What if what you videotape bombed? That day did not go well? It's okay. Don't feel like you got to start all over again. What they're looking for is what did you learn from it. In this piece here about what are your next steps, if what you presented and the day you videotaped and you got a whole lot of that deer in the headlights look, that's okay. The goal here is what did you learn and how are you going to help them? And if you can articulate that, here's what I'm going to do differently, here's what I did do, and moved on from here, here's how I changed my lesson plan because that just really did not go well today, that's exactly what they want to see. So that reflective practitioner piece is huge. They're really looking for that. Okay? So I've had a couple people do that. It's like, oh, I taught this lesson and it didn't go well, but that's the only day I videotaped, and now what do I do? It's okay. Just include it in your commentary and build on that. Talk about how you're going to improve it. So, let's see. When you talk about your next steps, what are you doing after this? Two of the big things they look for is how are you going to provide feedback to students about how they did on today's criteria? And then when will they have the opportunity to use that feedback that you gave them? So, today I gave them this feedback, and maybe you worked with small groups and you told them, in each group, here's the things you need to work on. Okay, so now that they know that, when are they going to get the opportunity to apply it and to show that they've learned and they can master it again? So that's a big piece of that. What feedback did you give them? Just marking things wrong does not score well. You need to actually give them feedback about, did you think of this? Or check your, I'm a math teacher, you lost your negative sign is a common one. What is it that they had trouble with? Help them identify that. But then when do they have the opportunity to apply that? That's another one of those things that will bump that section up higher. Okay? All right, let's see. Throughout all three of the tasks, you want to keep academic language in mind. They look for it in all three sections now. Instead of, they used to just have that one chunk, so they want to see it in your planning. They want to see it in your instructing. So if possible, if there's something you can have in your video that shows you doing something related to language, even if it's you just verbally saying, okay, tell me again what this word means, so they know you're focusing on the language. It's in your lesson plan, but they can see you doing something with it. And if it's part of your assessment as well, have the kids define this word, or tell me what this means, or using it in your assessment in some way, that also scores well. Like I said, show your skills as a reflective practitioner. Use those best practice methods. Tell why you chose to teach in a certain way. Don't worry if a lesson flops. What's important is, what are you going to do about it? How do you fix that? Because every teacher has those days. Even if you've taught for many, many years, you're going to have one of those days where the lesson just does not go well. And so you need to know, how do you move forward from here? Where do you go? Practice. Videotape something totally random at home. Your cat watching TV. I don't care what it is. But practice the videotaping, practice compressing something, practice uploading it, so that when it gets to be the important thing, you'll know how to do it. You don't want that to be the first time and then you're struggling with it. If that gets to be the case, though, email me, call me, I will help you. I will try and walk you through it as best I can. We've done a lot of phone conferences on videotaping. I've had people just bring their laptop to me, and we just sit down and we make it work. And I haven't had anybody yet that we couldn't get it to work. So, we'll get there. But if you need help, let me know, okay? I'm happy to help you with that. But most of the time, just practice it first. Make sure you've got the cords you need, whatever you need to do to get the video off the camera, into the computer, compress it, and upload it. Those are usually the biggest places we run into problems. Okay? So practice that part first. Take more than you need so you can cut it down and get just the parts you want. Other questions? Are we thoroughly overwhelmed yet?
So we have in the student work, how many do you want? Do you want the whole class, or do you want just a few?
No, they just want samples of student work. They do, it's a good question though, when you read through the directions on that part, they want you to give kind of an overall summary of the whole class, but then you only have to show samples. I think it's 3 for most people. So, they want to know when you did the criteria and you did them up, say you had your 14 kids in your class, 3 of them scored at the lowest level, 8 of them were in the middle, I had 1 really right up on top here. And how did they score and in which areas of your criteria? So they want you to kind of find some patterns and show the overall, but then you'll only show samples of 1 from each level.
Can you make a copy of their stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And typically what people do is they scan it in. So we do have scanners here on campus. There's one in the library, and then there's one CH104. It's one of the computer labs that's never a classroom, so it's always available. Most of your school districts probably have a scanner you can use it too if you ask them. But and actually we have one in the ed office too. If you have something, we can scan it to you, and it'll actually scan to our email. We can forward it to you. But yeah, that's usually what people do is they just scan it in, and then they've got a picture of it. I've actually had people take digital pictures too, and that most of the time actually works. You can get fairly close, take a digital picture of it, that quite often will do the trick, so.
Okay, so you need work from 3 different levels.
3
either
levels.
High, average, and low.
Yep.
Well, and if possible, one should be from a special area like
Yeah.
ESL,
And that's,
special ed.
they want 3, but if you have one of those special areas, special ed, ELL, they prefer one of those 3 to be from one of those students. But if you don't, then they want you to break it out to just kind of 3 levels in general. So their preference is to one of the special groups if you have it. So.
And kind of as a note on the ones I've looked at, the weakest areas I've seen is the assessment area. And I think what seems to do well is if you make a table and you put the number of A's and B's and C's.
Yeah, match your criteria, know what your rubric's going to be, and then just say how many students got what score out of each of these.
Or if you had a rubric to put
Yeah.
the scores that you had. But just be sure you evaluate that well, because I think that's an area, at least mine.
That is, and that's the piece that we haven't done as much with in the past. So it's something that we're all still just working
And then
on.
from there, you can get your patterns of things.
Right, then you can see what patterns and who's doing well and what, and, yep, Brittany?
So I know for like kindergarten, we don't really use like rubrics.
Yep.
So, could we make like a rubric? I mean, we don't give them 4 out of 5 and 2 out of 5 and stuff like that, but could we make to show that this is how we're assessing them? We're looking
Yes.
at like, one, we're looking at can they write their name according to their lines? And
Yep, yeah, you can certainly make your own rubric for how you're gonna kind of differentiate where the students are at,
'cause
yeah.
that's one thing that I've asked my mentor teacher on is like assessment, and basically we write stars or we write slow down with your name or something like that,
Yeah.
or if they have their numbers, we bring them over and say, which way does our 7 go, and stuff like that. So I mean, it's
Yeah.
not really stuff that you can,
Yeah.
I mean, we just change it basically and talk with them. So
Right,
you have
and
to
so the
write
feedback can be verbal, and you can talk about that, and then what's really good is try to make sure if you're working with real little ones and your feedback is verbal,
Yeah.
try and catch some of that on the videotape.
that. Okay.
So that they can see you giving that feedback to students, because you're right, a lot of that, they're not readers yet, so.
Yeah, I mean, they can't.
not like you can write a
slow
lot of
down and
comments
look at it.
out.
Oh, I got scribbles, yay.
Yeah.
Great job, it says.
Yeah, the teacher wrote on my paper.
You could actually use a rubric with that too. You could
Yeah.
write on target, moving to target, not there yet. So
Yeah.
that would be a way to generalize
Yeah.
that. and
I
then
use
you-
rubrics in kindergarten.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, that would be great for like some aspects of it, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that would work great. Then there's a way to quantify it, but it's, and that's real easy to do. You could look at your papers and put the stars are there yet, the ones where you have comments, you could put that on file and then
Yeah.
you would do that.
And sometimes people will use like a smiley face and a straight and a sad, or they'll use a plus, check, minus.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways to do it with symbols as well.
Yeah, we do like a lot of small pieces and
Yeah.
pluses. We're not
Yeah.
looking
A
at
plus.
I wanted to
They're helping you.
reach out on
They
and
were
smiley
good,
face
so
on it.
they
Yeah.
knew what they're supposed to do.
Any other questions?
Do I get it?
Okay, well then, I think that part we've got done. Debbie is here to help you if you've got the elementary math, and Paulette's here to help you if you've got the elementary literacy, and I will work with Stephanie on the Spanish one. And so then you can kind of get some one-on-one on your specific TPA. So, yeah, Chelsea.